Do your tabletop products need a companion mobile app? So, we're going to be talking about what companion mobile apps are, the different types of companion mobile apps, things that are available, the pros and cons of the different kinds, things like that. Just as a way of introduction.
So my name is Matthew Ridley. I'm the co-owner and lead designer for Milk Can Studios. We're a software developer and design shop. We're also the people who make GameFor. I also I've been professionally developing for 20 years. I've been doing mobile apps for over 10 years. And I'm also a tabletop gamer. Primarily play RPGs, but I've played Magic the Gathering, I've played board games, Keyforge, I've gone into miniatures last year.
That's my fault.
So.
And I'm Adam Loper. I'm marketing director and lead designer for Milk Can and for GameFor. I've been a professional visual designer, which has moved into user experience and user interface over the years, but I've been a designer for over 25 years professionally. I've also been a digital and traditional marketer for about 10 years, and I'm also a tabletop gamer, predominantly miniature games. I run a YouTube channel called Tabletop Minions. I've been doing that for about 7 years now. 163,000 subscribers, I think, roughly right now. I mainly focus on getting people into the tabletop gaming, miniature wargaming hobby, showing them that it's not too difficult to paint, it's not too scary, it's, trying to get people into that. And we kind of did the same thing with GameFor. We're helping to try to get people into tabletop gaming. So, in today's agenda, we're going to talk about...
Yeah, so right now our agenda is going to be, we're going to explain what we mean by companion apps. There's a lot of different people who use the terminology differently, so we're going to kind of explain what we mean when we use that word. We're going to talk about whether or not you need an app, or is there something else that can do the same thing for maybe give your users a better experience, or maybe even be cheaper, better for your budget. We're going to tell you about how you get what you need. So what do you need to do if you're coming to hire a company like ourselves, or trying to hire someone into your company to get this product created. We're going to talk a little bit about cost.
At a pretty high level.
Pretty high level, but kind of give you an idea of like what stuff to think about when you're getting prices, stuff that you might know about, stuff you might not know about. And then we're going to talk a little bit about some future trends. And then we'll wrap it up with any additional questions.
So, the question that was asked before, what are companion apps? And basically, you've got a couple different types. You've got complementary interactions, you've got dependent integrations, and you've got independent recreation experiences. Complementary interactions are things that will help to speed up the gameplay, keep score, that kind of stuff.
Right, so stuff that helps provide a better experience, but it's not crucial to the play. Like they can use it or they don't have to use it.
As an example, the Keyforge app, if you've played or messed around a bit with that, that is an app that it's not required to play, but it allows you to scan your deck and kind of track your wins and losses and all that kind of stuff. But you can completely play the experience without ever having to touch it. It's totally fine.
Right, like you've had it since the beginning, and I have installed it, but I haven't used it. So,
yep.
But we both have, from a gameplay perspective, we have the same experience.
Yeah. Then there's dependent integrations, and dependent integrations are pretty vital to the product. You can't kind of play the game without them. Mansions of Madness Second Edition has got kind of a thing where the game is sort of difficult to play without. I think
it's impossible to play.
XCOM was the same thing. There was this app that you had to download, which is free. It's always a free app because you don't want someone to have to pay for the app that they've already paid for the game and all that jazz.
Yeah. The biggest concern that a lot of gamers will express when there's something like that is really your long-term support.
Yeah.
Is the company going to be around 5 years, 10 years? Or is the app going to be updated so it works on newer devices?
Exactly.
So...
we've seen that with a couple of apps already with a game I really enjoyed, but the Golem Arcana with the little, it was a Bluetooth kind of pen, and it was a miniatures game, and it played with a companion app that was a dependent integration, and now they don't really support it anymore, so there's that. And then there's the independent recreation experience, which is basically taking a board game experience and making it an app. So I'm trying to think, Galaxy Trucker is one, but there's another one that I used to play quite a bit, Neuroshima Hex. Yeah, So that is basically just the board game first came, and then eventually the app, and then, you know, there's ways to do that as well, and there are benefits to that as well, you know, in certain types of games.
Well, yeah, and the benefit of that is you're sharing rules and artwork, you're hitting a different market, or even expanding your market, getting more engagement. You know, it's not always easy to play your game on the go. This gives them that experience. So that's kind of the benefit of those.
Sometimes the benefit as well is if you want to learn the game better, but you don't have anybody to play with right now. It takes a bit more work frequently to get the AI, for lack of a better term, the opponent, to be a good experience in some situations, but it can be done, and specifically with board games because the rules are kind of
right. And now with networking, you can create the experience with people that are not in the same physical location, but that comes at a cost, and can if they have to find other people online, if your game's not popular enough, then they're not going to play it either. So.
Right. So the question then becomes: do I need an app, as we think of as normal apps on our phones, or so potentially something else? There's big differences between mobile apps and something that's usually referred to as the mobile web. So a mobile app, you have to get it from your app store, whether it's iOS or Google and that kind of stuff. And we're going to go through the pros and cons of those things. Whereas a mobile web is basically a web page that is designed to be responsive, and it is designed to work just as well on a screen that wide in your hand as it does on something like this. So, most websites these days are responsive, but when you're specifically trying to use something that's more from a gameplay aspect, it becomes kind of a different set of rules that you sort of have to follow. So we can kind of go through that stuff, but I think first we're going to go through the pros and cons of mobile apps.
Right, so for mobile apps, the main reason why you might choose to have the app over a website is device interactions. So basically being able to access the camera, the geolocation, beacons, NFC tags, basically all that, the physical stuff. There are ways that are starting to work decently through the web, but traditionally you're going to want to go with the actual mobile app if you're doing that. Offline access is another great benefit of a true mobile app. So if your base does not have connectivity, think of, if you've got especially a younger population that might have tablets that their parents don't pay for cellular, this they can play in the car, that kind of thing. And then a little bit more in-depth experience, because you're not trying to load all these pages all the time whenever you're going to it. You can do a little bit more fun stuff because you like animations, right. Scrolling, more effects versus website where it's traditionally going to be page after page.
And the device interactions is, I think, really one of the things that shines most on an app, because what it allows you to do is, depending on the game and how you've got it set up, you can pick up the phone and shake it, and that's some sort of interaction that happens with the game, maybe the dice, that kind of stuff, because the phone's got the accelerometer in it, so it knows when it's being shook. The camera is not just for taking pictures, but sometimes it's for reading a QR code that then says this, and then allows that to happen in the game, and that kind of stuff. So there's all these different things that are built right into our smartphones that we all carry around that can help the game a lot in that situation.
Right. So you're probably saying, okay, so I'll always make a mobile app. Well, there's definitely some limits to that.
Yeah.
Many studies have shown that users do not keep everything they've installed. You might have 50 or 60 bookmarks on your web, but you typically only keep, you might keep like 40 apps, but the traditional user uses 5 or less apps on their phone actively. Most of the time, apps are just kept in the background and then eventually deleted. There's usually a lot higher cost. You're supporting devices. There are ways to kind of help minimize that cost, but usually traditionally the cost is higher going with a full mobile app. The other difference is there's no real square space for apps. What we mean by this is there are some tools where you can kind of build your mobile app yourself without having to have a developer and designer included into it. But templates are very limited. It's more like GeoCities back in the late 90s than what we see with like Squarespace, where a lot of times you can see a Squarespace website and not know that it was actually done that way. Sure.
Well, I do want to update you on that because we're building exactly that, but let's talk about that later.
Okay, perfect.
I'll come to it.
Mobile web. Pros for the mobile web are generally there is a lower cost, because the cost to develop in the mobile web is generally a one-time thing. You develop it for the web, and then when you make an update, you develop it for the web, and when you do that, you develop it for the web.
And because the web has been around longer, there's a larger developer pool,
Sure.
more tools, resources to get stuff done. So
If you're developing an app that's got to be for both Android and for iOS, then you've generally got two versions if you're working natively. If you're not working natively and you're using something like React Native or some of these other things where you develop once and then it splits it, those are getting better, but they're still not necessarily as good in some situations as using just straight native. So it's a bunch of work back and forth. And it also is work back and forth in certain situations where you have to then go through the Apple Store, go through the Google Store, just to make a relatively simple update sometimes to the app. Whereas if you need to make a website change, it's a website change. And, it goes pretty
and you're
quick.
doubling your testing platform. So if you make a change that needs to be done on both platforms, you got to test both of them
Right.
and then re-release.
So easier and faster to update, kind of as I was just mentioning there about how it's a lot quicker to update.
Right. If there's a bug in your system and for some reason none of your users can sign on, you can wait up to most Apple is done within a day or two now. Versus though mobile web you can push it out almost immediately.
Yeah.
Again, there's strategies to help minimize that we've worked with clients. These are kind of generalities.
And that works across all platforms. So we have a person who sends us messages once in a while to ask us when we're going to make GameFor for the Windows Phone, which isn't probably going to happen. But now that we've got it on web as well, they now have access to be able to get into doing that. So it's cross-platform. It works on iOS, it works on Android, it works on a weird Linux phone that you might have, it works on tablets, it works on...
As good as this TV would be.
Yeah, if this TV had a web browser, we could show you the stuff there as well. I mean, it works on pretty much everything when you use web in those situations. There are, cons, certainly. One of the downsides is, again, you need connectivity. So if you're the kid in the backseat of the car driving to grandma's house, if you don't have some sort of Wi-Fi hotspot or something like that going on, it's going to be kind of a no-go. And then, of course, there's also, you don't really generally have too much access to the accelerometer and the other types of smartphone features. Like the camera, if you need to take a picture of something and then use it and put it into your website as your profile picture and stuff like that, great, that's really easy. But if you need to be able to scan things, sometimes it doesn't work as well.
What about something like calendar syncing or connecting communications?
Calendar syncing, I think you can do through the web.
You usually want.
Can't you?
Mm,
No, I mean, it
not
works
as well.
way better as a normal app, admittedly.
Okay.
Yeah, but being able to attach to calendar, even like alarms and stuff like that is obviously a lot more difficult with the web.
Right. And there are platforms that like React Native, Ionic. There's a few Flutter, a few that are starting to kind of bridge the gap, so you can kind of do all three platforms.
Mhm.
But they also have their cons where it's not really right once, deploy once. There are nuances and fixes, and sometimes you end up really writing the platform 4 times, or number of devices you're going to deploy to plus 1.
Right. So the question then becomes, how do you get what you need from what you're going to have to, if you've got this project you're working on, how are you going to figure out what it is you need, who you're going to talk to, all that kind of stuff. And you start with honestly sitting down with a big old pile of sprue in your mind and figuring out what is it that you want the app to do. The goal is really the most important thing, obviously. Target audience is the second.
Right. Are you looking for people that are on the go? Are you looking for people that can play with each other across the world? Are you just looking to have people be able to use your platform easier? Think of like D&D Beyond. Some people don't even need the player's handbook anymore because they can go on there and create a character that basically tunnels them right into what they are allowed and not allowed to have.
Mm-hmm. Knowing your audience, are you dealing with people who are going to be using this on a tablet, a laptop, a phone? What are they using it for? Is this just basically a simple companion app to keep score of things, or is this something else that you've got to be doing that's going to have a lot more interaction with the users and that kind of stuff? Knowing your budget is also pretty important, and we're going to talk a little bit more about kind of that to be, in the next kind of section. But the knowing your budget and understanding exactly what your return on investment is and the benefits and negatives and sometimes in that situation and what you can afford, what you can't afford, or what you can or can't having those things kind of set up ahead of time.
Right. And you don't necessarily need a hard number, but at least know like what stuff does it have to have, what stuff would you like to have, what stuff would be only if the budget allows type
Yeah.
thing. So that you kind of know ahead of time. If they tell you, if you have a budget for 20,000, they tell you that the app you want is going to be 80,000. You know, when you tell them no, you only have $20,000. What are you willing to compromise?
What's the minimum viable project or
Product.
So in that situation, like we've done this with a bunch of different clients in the past, you kind of set up this XY axis and you say, these things are hard to do, these things are easy to do, these things are nice to have, these things we must have. And then you look at each of the different features that you're trying to plan on and you kind of put where they are on there. And then you basically draw a line and say, this is what we're launching with. Everything on this side is what we're launching with, everything on that side is down the road. You had a question?
Is it more viable to think of each feature as kind of a percent of the total cost, or is more like a hardline number, or are both of those you're gonna get blown out of the water with them?
Explain a little bit further about what you mean by that.
Okay, what I mean is,
sorry.
say something like the shaking of the die thing.
Yep.
Is that for a game? God, now I can't even think of.
So
Roll for the Galaxy.
Sure.
Yep.
That compared to Yahtzee,
Mm-hmm.
would that feature be
I see
a
what
higher
you're- yes, sir.
percentage of the cost for one compared to the other, or is it adding that feature costs 8% of the budget?
So that's kind of where you kind of figure out where you're willing to go. Like if 50% of the budget is for that, but you're like, the game is really only rolls the dice, once a turn. They're not going to use it a
Right.
lot. That probably is not going to be. That's probably going to be one of those. Oh, it'd be really cool if we did this mechanic, but if it costs too much, then no.
And on a smartphone, just basically monitoring the accelerometer to figure out whether someone shook it violently or not, that's a relatively simple thing to do
Yeah.
in that particular situation. Whereas if you're doing it as mobile web, that's nearly kind of
Right.
impossible. At that point, you basically make it a button. To roll
And
the
that
dice.
kind of gets to where your goal is. Like, for some projects, having, augmented reality is a really nice to have, but probably is not going to happen.
Right.
Versus building like Pokemon Go, where it was a great deal of the project.
Yeah.
So it's what was making the experience. So their goal was to create an AR environment for Pokemon. So that was their top priority. That was the goal of the project. Everything else was minimal. So they didn't have, realistic graphics. They might have sacrificed on that. Where you might go, oh, for mine, I want to be able to. I'm teaching kids about science stuff, so I want it to be almost photorealistic graphics. But I don't care. It doesn't have to. The dinosaur doesn't have to walk through the room with them to learn it.
Exactly. So the budget's the important thing to kind of figure out, at least in a ballpark to start with. Then you need to definitely understand your timeline and when you need to get things completed. Like when you're planning on launching this, is this a app that needs to launch along with the launch of the actual board game, let's say, for example, or if it's an RPG,
Kickstarter, yeah,
is it a
whatever.
Kickstarter? Is it something where potentially you are, it's a property you've had for a while and now you want to put this out, but you don't necessarily have to get it on a completely, absolutely perfect timeline. The other situation, which we're going to talk a little bit too, is that not only if you are trying to match timelines, you don't even have to just figure about like I have to work with the developers and all that stuff, but you also have to work with the manufacturers and the people who like you might have the app all done and that thing's still sitting on a boat, whatever product it is. So that's kind of a
Right, and that's the better side of that to follow on because you can get if it's a true mobile app, you can
Right.
have it all approved and just sitting there holding for your release.
Yep.
Versus you need to launch it and now you're kind of just sitting there waiting
For
it.
the mobile app to be released. Yeah. And then we move into basically collecting your assets. If you are wanting to make an app that's going to be working with one of your current board games, you're going to want to have available to the developers all the different artwork, the icons, the colors. You can build a style guide that will help them immensely and get them to get their work done a lot more quickly, which means a lot less billable.
Right, but, yeah, so
Just to add on that list, one thing that board games usually don't have, but that's necessary for apps, is music and sounds and all
that's,
that.
yep,
Sure,
great
sure,
point.
yep, that's a
So
good
just
point
take
too,
into
yeah.
account that
Yes.
That's frequently something that they're picking from like someplace else almost, you know what I mean? But if you've got a bunch of artwork that was like your cover and it's really amazing, sending like a small little version of a JPEG of that cover to the people is not going to be all that useful. But if you can send them the original Photoshop document that the artist sent with all the different layers and all that kind of stuff, then it becomes much more easy for the designers and the developers to be able to knock out the background or just, and
Right.
be able to because sometimes it's really cool to see like the main person or whatever that's in that artwork move along separate from the background, and that's impossible to do if it's all been flattened. So
Right.
talking with the people and finding out exactly what they need is going to help you a lot in the long run.
And the more that you are able to provide, the cheaper it's going to be for you, and the faster the timeline's going to be.
Yeah.
If you want the designer on that side to recommend logos and placements and graphics and all this stuff, can definitely be done, but that's going to inflate your budget. They can redo artwork, do artwork in the style. They can contact your artist, create new artwork. But again, it's going to inflate your budget.
Absolutely. And then the biggest kind of important thing before you start actually talking to some company to work with is getting communication ducks in a row. So who's going to be doing what? Who's the main stakeholder? Who's kind of the lead on the project? Who needs to approve it? Usually the lead. What other parts of your organization?
Or is it a license? Is there someone on the licensing side that you're going to have contact? What do they need to see to sign off? How much time do they need to sign off? What's the turnaround?
Are you going to hopefully be able to meet at a conference like this with the people who are doing the developing and having some conversation, or is it all going to be via email and teleconference and things like that? Kind of getting that stuff figured out ahead of time before you even start going out and talking to folks about the project is a pretty good idea, at least a rough outline kind of thing.
What's your recommendation for the IP stuff? For example, if the company creates the music and stuff like that, should it all belong to the publisher of the board game?
If somebody creates music specifically for the publisher of the board game to use, then it would be, that's...
Well, let's say it's supplementary art, they did the menus, for example, in the style
Sure.
of the game.
Mhm.
Yeah, traditionally, so like for our company, there are some people that will go, oh, anything that we created, they might own. But traditionally, like our company you're basically a work for hire. So anything that we create is your property. It's just like the same as an artist. If he does a drawing for you,
And you pay them, then
even though he created it, but he did it on, as commissioned. He's getting paid for it. It's that company's property. So.
Right. Yep. There are obviously, if you're building an app, there are plenty of like royalty-free kind of places you can find music if you want background music for your app. You definitely need to do a deep dive though into the licensing because they may be royalty-free to use on say YouTube or a couple other places. But if it's on an app that you sell or anything like that, very frequently now there's another level that you have to kind of go to, within, and it depends on the company. And sometimes it depends on the company, and then the company is actually wrong, and then the people who actually created it come back, and it's a thing. So always try to do the due diligence and say, if we're going to use this music, I need to be absolutely sure that we have the rights to use it in an app that maybe gets downloaded a million times. There's also sometimes like numbers, like if it's in something that gets downloaded only half a million times, it's this. But if
Or
it's
yeah,
over,
depending on how much money, like there's a threshold on some stuff.
yeah.
And if you don't know, if you're like, oh, well, we like this type of music and stuff, just ask the team you're working with or teams if you're deciding to kind of do multiple.
Mhm.
And they can usually help you with licensing. They've done this, usually multiple times. They can also recommend like, oh, if you like this, I can try to find a style that would, fit, and then give you a couple of samples that are close to it.
Yeah. So then the question becomes the who, like who's the person that you're going to, or the people preferably, that you're going to be working with. In general, I would say it's very difficult for a team of one to pull this off.
Well, it depends on the complexity of the project.
Admittedly, yes.
And then the more people you have involved in the project, the greater chance it is that it's going to, someone's going to delay, there's going to be communication issues. So if you hire 8 people or 8 companies to do different parts versus one company that can do it all, those are kind of some trade-offs you're going to want to look at. A lot of times the companies will, if they don't have expertise, will usually have someone that they partner with that can help you out with that. But the main, a lot of the abilities that we see that you're probably going to want to be looking for, if you're doing a web app, do they have web experience? If you're doing a mobile app, do they have mobile experience? Design, if you're needing design work, or even if you just want the app to lay out properly, you're going to want someone in there, unless you've got someone on your team that already kind of knows how to design it, just doesn't know how to build it. Data, if you've got some kind of data-based background that needs to feed data into or out of the app, do they have experience doing that? Hosting, this is a lot of consulting companies don't do their own hosting, but they'll usually be able to recommend, based on price, location, is this a worldwide launch, is this just a regional, backup consistency, uptime, they can give you kind of information about that. Also localization. Are you targeting just one language? Are you targeting 20 languages? That kind of differentiation can greatly affect the project, and also skill-wise. Some have never done that, but a lot of people, I would say a lot of companies have started doing localizations, become more common, and the tools have gotten a lot better.
Absolutely. The experience is important, kind of like Matt was touching on with interaction experience and figuring out, do they have backgrounds in UX, UI, user experience, user interface, and that kind of stuff. You have an idea of what your app needs to do, and you use apps, we all use apps, but there are times when you can get almost a little bit too close to a project and say, this is the way it should work. And then a user experience person can say, well, actually, if we do it like this and this, it's less clicks, or it's easier, or it's more memorable for the person, so they don't have to constantly go back and that kind of stuff. So having that kind of access in the organization that you deal with is going to work out real well. And then familiarity with your product and industry is also super helpful. Like we have a lot of familiarity with the gaming industry, being gamers ourselves, working with other gaming companies and things like that.
But we also have I myself have worked with a lot of different manufacturers in the past. So when I worked with one of our clients, we were helping them do the website. But when we were doing the website, they talked about some of their back-end process for manufacturing, and we were able to help them not only improve that part, but also improve their process in the background.
Absolutely.
So understanding that will help out. It'll also speed up your project if you can have the same kind of terminology. Doesn't mean you have to go by that, but if they don't, if they don't know, what a board game is, or they think it's just, Monopoly, you're probably gonna have to set some information up, what is area of control, or whatever they might, to make sure that you guys are talking the same stuff.
Right. Then local versus remote. If you can find somebody in your local area, that generally does help, because then it's a lot easier if you do need to make face-to-face, meetings and conversations, and even handing off sometimes certain assets and things like that, although most of that's done digitally, obviously, these days.
Time zones are a difference. Are you going to be able to talk to them pretty much any time during the day, or are they going to be offset from you where you're really only to meet once or twice a day, beginning or end? Doing that delays the project. If they run into an issue an hour into it, they can't ask you, and then it takes you a whole other day to respond, that's 2 days gone versus a quick hop on a phone call to get the answer.
Or a Slack message, or even anything like that, email.
By the way, India is exactly 12 and a half hours out of this time zone.
Sure.
There's not a good time to have a meeting.
Yeah, we're from Central Time Zone, so yeah, we've run into that exact same issue. And then cost. Most, not all, but most companies will usually try to at least start with an hourly amount, and then kind of figure out through the scope of the quote, what that's going to mean. And then at that point, some companies will then decide, well, because of this and how many hours and our hourly rate, it's going to be this.
Right. So basically, this hourly or fixed cost. Usually, you'll get an estimate either way. The difference is that hourly means that as much time as they have to put into the project, you're going to pay them for those hours. Fixed cost means that they are basically taking on the risk, saying we will get it done for this amount with these items done. So they're kind of taking on that risk that they estimated, right? So generally, the set of fixed amount estimates are generally higher, but sometimes, depending on the project, you can sometimes save money too. Hourly is usually the safest for both companies to work on. It just kind of depends on what your flavor is. If you know that you have a specific set budget, you can't go over this amount. And you can also do roof estimates where you're like, we're going to pay you hourly, but when you get into, if we get 80% of the budget, before you go further, let us know what's going on so you don't waste your whole budget and find out they only got 10% of the app done.
Right, yeah. And then there are other things kind of that get also added into that cost. There's support, there's basically usually support's done through a retainer, but you also can have warranty if it turns out that there's some unknown bug that didn't get caught in testing and a lot of other things. is that covered, is that not, those kind of things. Knowing
Right.
that
Is
stuff
there-
up front's important.
Is there a feature that they promised would be working that's not working? That kind of thing. Or, and as we get more and more complex, there's probably about 2,000 different types of cell phones that are actively being used, if not more. Stuff is going to get missed. You're going to find a bug as it goes on and you've got to decide, well, it only affects 1 out of my 200,000 users, or it's affecting 20% of my users. And then it's, who pays for that? Is it because we missed it from testing, or they missed it when they were building it and testing themselves? Make sure you understand that and get that upfront of how you want that to be handled when that situation arises.
So then we've got the typical engagement process, which is sitting down and trying to figure out exactly, it's the process for reaching out to companies and finding out exactly how this is all going to go forward.
Right, so this is basically a quick generalization of once you contact the company or multiple companies, all the way through the product's launch and it's going out. Just to give you kind of an idea of what to expect. So you're going to get your list of potential companies, then contact them. Usually your company or those companies will have an NDA. You'll want that first before you do any interactions. That will cover your intellectual property, and usually they'll want some kind of protection as well. So they don't go and give you the $1 million idea of how they're going to make your app for $5 versus the $500,000 all your other competitors, all their competitors are doing. They want to kind of explain that too. So make sure that you have a non-disclosure in place. Once you have that, you can either send or you can just sit down and discuss your request for proposal. So that's basically what you want built.
And that's coming from kind of the previous slide where you're doing all that kind of figuring everything
Right, and this can be as informal or formal as you want. The benefit of formal is that you can hit a lot more companies if you want, and know that they're all getting the same information, so they're basically all in the same play field, so that you can really kind of judge what you're getting. Informal might be able to give you a little bit better idea, so that you might say, oh, I need my app to do this, this, and this, and they'll go, oh, well, we could do that, but what if we did it like this? This will actually save you money and be a better experience. You'll sometimes get a better product by being able to be flexible with your requirements and being able to interact and kind of feed off of, what did you mean by this line item versus just them going, I think they mean all this, this is what we're gonna have to price it at. Again, make sure they know what your goals are before you get to the list of requirements.
Once you've received all the different proposals that come through, then it's time to, usually the company who's going to be the client in the situation sits down, sets them all out, and the people who are the stakeholders in all this situation kind of figure out, oh, this one's out and this one's in, and you just keep going until you basically usually get a couple, and then you kind of start to tighten things up from there.
Right. Sometimes you'll go through just one. You'll go, this company fits our needs.
Sure.
This is who we're going to use. Sometimes you'll go, we started with 10, we go to 2. It's just like hiring, any employee.
Exactly.
You're basically hiring them, and then so kind of go through the process until you feel comfortable that this is the company that's going to build the project that you want for the price that you want. Then they should have a consulting agreement that will basically tell you, what are they guaranteeing to do, for how much are they going to do, what are billing rates, what's not covered, all the legal fun stuff. And then it's time for your kickoff meeting. So that's usually when you bring all the stakeholders. This is where your communication plan kind of comes in handy of who needs to be in that meeting. And then you're going to meet they'll kind of tell you who they think they should meet on their side. Usually it's the lead developer, lead designer, and an owner. And then sometimes people are wearing multiple hats, so they'll switch around. Maybe there's a project manager or a business analyst as well. And then, so that basically just starts off the meeting. Everybody kind of gets level set. You get the introductions out of the way. They talk about, this is how we're going to track the process. This is how we're going to give you updates and testing so that you can see how the project's going. And from there, communication and building of the project is going.
Right. Once the project's been built, it gets to a certain level at which point testing becomes important, and usually testing starts on the side of the company that's doing the building. They do internal testing before they even get to you guys, and then Once they get it to a point where they're pretty happy with it, then they start to take it to you and see where you see problems. And then those kind of revisions go back and forth.
And sometimes this is where if you're looking to have, any kind of focus groups or beta testers, are a great time to bring them in. Have those people identified, have some people that are consistent throughout the project, and as you're getting closer towards the end, bring in some people that haven't seen the project or haven't seen the product before or haven't seen it in a while.
Fresh set of eyes.
That fresh set of eyes is going to notice something that, oh, this doesn't make any sense, or this text doesn't make sense. I cannot read it or I can't understand it. Sometimes when you get too close, everybody thinks it's a great idea based on what they had thought about how the project was going, and then you get to the end and go, oh, this is really hard for everyone to use that weren't, tightly tied to that project.
That's frankly how apps that are very difficult to use get to market, is that they don't do enough testing with people outside of the organization or that kind of thing. Then everything goes perfectly and you go to launch. And if everything doesn't go perfectly, then you've got some tweaks and some fixes and things like that. Launch for apps is dependent upon, again, like the Google Play Store, the Apple App Store. A thing that we've bumped into in the past is Apple, how long do they close down now over Christmas?
They're down to just like 3 or 4 days now, which is really good. They used to be 2.5 weeks.
Right. So if you had an app that you were trying to launch just before Christmas, you needed to develop it a good deal before Christmas, because otherwise it wasn't going to get okayed, but that window has closed to some degree.
Right, and they used to not test on the weekends, and that's become pretty much non-existent.
Yeah, they've gotten a lot faster. And then after that, it's time to start looking at, well, what kind of features do you want to add to the next version? Apps are not built and then, normally they're not just built and then they're done. They always have things that are being added on over time. Doesn't have to happen immediately afterwards, but getting feedback from the users who say, I really would like it if you could do this, I really would like it if this was as a feature, helps you to figure out what is priority in the features that are going forward.
And again, when that happens, remember your original goal.
Right.
Because adding everything that every user is just like, any games or products. You can add everything, but then, someone's going to be, upset about it. So figuring out that right balance. If most of your users are asking for something and it makes sense, it fits in with your product, and it makes sense in your budget, that's something to do. If it's one person that's just being very vocal, but it goes against what everyone else seems to think, that's where you might try to just, nicely communicate that it's not going to be done, or that it's,
And speaking of budget, then the question comes, how much does it cost? And this is, well, the easy answer is that it depends.
But yeah, so we're going to try to do this at a really high level. The base considerations, like when you're trying to figure out how much it's going to cost, is we've kind of talked about this a lot, is building the project. So how long and how much is it going to cost to build a project? But the other main components of your cost of a digital product is maintenance, keeping, fixing the bugs, redeploying. Is there updates to the like Apple, Android? Is there a new browser out that has certain ticks that needs to be done? How much is that going to cost? Hosting. You can sometimes some games that have no interactivity, no authentication. You won't have to host. But most that have interactions where people are signing in or they're getting some kind of database push, or as a website, you're going to have hosting costs as well, which is basically servers sitting somewhere that's giving out the information.
If it's a simple point tracker or turn tracker or kind of a companion app sort of thing like that, generally almost nothing in the hosting, if anything. But as soon as there's like a login and data that's being stored and things like that, that's when things can start to get a little more expensive in the hosting.
Cost of living and quality greatly affect the app. So again, kind of know what quality you're looking for, and we found that generally where the developers are located, where the company's located, highly depends. If they're all in New York City, in a high rise, you're going to be paying a lot more. If they're remote, or have a office in rural Canada, probably going to get a better deal. But that doesn't mean that everyone's got the same quality. Check what they've done in the past. Find out are they releasing a good product, and two, look to see how long their products have lasted. Sometimes you'll see a flashy app or website go up, And then within 6 months, you can see that it's not being updated, they're having problems with it, and that generally means that the quality maybe behind the scenes is bad, and they're having a hard time maintaining or adding features to it. So we kind of look at those two things to get an idea of kind of what kind of cost you're looking for and what kind of quality.
And then speaking of quality, you've got onshore versus offshore. We touched a little bit about the offshore being on the other side of the planet and that kind of stuff. So there's downsides to that time change issue, or trying to be able to communicate back and forth.
Not all offshores are bad, but not all onshores are good.
Sure, exactly.
And there's also companies that are starting when about the last 5 years as backlash against offshoring has risen. There's now companies that basically have a skeleton crew located onshore that then the back end is all offshored. So they'll say, oh yeah, we're here. So if that's a concern, ask them. But again, if you're really looking for the quality and stuff like that, look at the other signs to really understand who they are and what they're going to give for you. And then technology use. If you're using tried and true website technology, or if you're trying to use the latest VR and 3D graphics and newest features that just came onto the phones and everything else, again, the prices are going to go up because there's going to be fewer people that know how to use that technology, and they'll just demand a higher dollar for that technology. And then we're going to talk about some of the hidden costs. So these are kind of costs that we've talked about that people coming in, to talk to us don't always know about, or they've complained that when they're like, oh, we did this project and then we found out about these other things that weren't communicated. So we're going to try to give you, these aren't all the hidden costs, but we're trying to present with some of the other stuff too. Because it seems like once you start the conversation about some of these things, that's when they'll go, oh yeah, don't forget you need this kind of money for this. If it's a mobile app, developer licensing. Most of the time it's going to be $99 a year for Apple, and then a one-time $25 fee for Google. Sometimes they'll host and release it themselves, so they'll do the developer license. You'll usually want that yourself so you have more control over that. Because if you have to swap over, it can be done, but it's usually a pain, and can get into having to actually delist your app and relist it elsewhere. Updates and deprecations. So every time a new iOS, Android release comes out, Chrome, our browser comes out, there's stuff that's being moved off for old technology and new stuff's being added in. Find out kind of what your long-term costs are going to be. Are you going to have to update the app once a year? Or are you going to have to update it 10 times a year? Or are you not going to have to update it for 3 years because of the
Container package and stuff
yeah,
like that. Yeah.
that's ours the time to live.
Yeah.
Hosting. Are they using your email, or are they going to have to use a separate email server? What kind of, based on volume size, what kind of cost are you looking at? Database. Where's the data going to be hosted? If you're doing worldwide and they only have data hosted in, say, Ohio, you might be not giving your users the experience they want. Again, network. What kind of network costs are you doing? Not only to the end users, but between the servers, database, hosting. If they're using, say, Amazon Cloud for everything, you usually don't have network charges between. But if they're being hosted, like say you're using Squarespace for your website, or using Azure for your database, and then you're using someone else for your email, those talking between each other, that back-end services will usually charge you more.
Right.
And then scalability. How if you launch your app, how are you able to handle if it goes to 2 million people within a month? If you hit the right thing and it blows up, is it going to fall over, or are you going to be able to handle a scaling issue?
It's also App Store reviews and keeping track of those things. A lot of times, because to be able to answer App Store reviews, the login that basically frequently is the one that put it up there has to pay attention to it. There's a lot of back and forth in that kind of stuff, because you do want to respond to specifically negative reviews, especially if they are kind of off base. You want to keep an eye on that stuff.
Sometimes users will use the reviews as a support, even though you'll have like
I'm having this problem with it.
Support email, they'll go, I'm having this issue. So, and then all you have to do is, sometimes you just reply and go, oh, we fixed this, or contact us and we'll get more details, and then they're happy. There are services that will let you know when new reviews come out, how you're trending up and down, that you can monitor, but those are some more additional costs. And then technical and user support, who's gonna talk to the users, who's gonna understand technical stuff, are you keeping track and updating everything? Is the company you hired doing that? Are you taking first shot and handling stuff that you think you can do, and then stuff you don't know, you're engaging them? Where is that gonna go?
We got about a minute left here, so we're gonna have to pull out, but this is our information, so if it comes up. We'll be downstairs, down at the bottom of the corkscrew stairs if you want to ask any questions. Also, we're in booth E401 during the trade show on Wednesday and Thursday, so you can come stop by, or if you want to grab a business card, we can hand you those as well. So yeah, I don't want to take up the next people's time, so we'll just kind of start heading this direction, and then you can ask us some questions if you want to. But thank you.